Good morning, people. I have something I need to do rather briefly. It's one of those bittersweet things. But I have a friend of mine, actually a family friend, or a family that is my friends, that are leaving. But one of those members in particular is somebody that everybody knows, and they're moving away. And so my friend Sarah and her family can stand up. But Sarah, everybody knows Sarah. I want you to stand up right now, Sarah, in particular. Every Sunday I come out and she claps for me, cheers. She sees me in town, she hugs me, she loves me. And she is moving to Idaho. The whole family's moving. Why don't you guys stand up right now, too? The Garlands have been a part of this church since way before I was ever in this community. And again, we're going to miss them, love them, and everything else. Sarah is like the mayor of Duvall that everybody kind of knows, you know? It's just like, she is that awesome. So we're going to miss them for sure. But boy, love on them as you see them this morning too. Also, just want to follow up really quick with what Pastor Scott was saying as far as why you want to be in a regroup for this next series. I've written a manual for that series, but the way I kind of drove the questions for that manual was to interact as a group, that it's going to take some group interaction and participation in the answering of the questions, because again, I think we all kind of need one another to work through some of these things. So instead of it being a manual or I tell you a bunch of stuff and then you answer questions, it just goes right into kind of thoughtful, Socratic, group-oriented questions where we all work together to come up with sort of a sense of, here's a good answer to this challenge or problem. Both an answer that is thoughtful to those asking it, understanding of maybe what their criticisms are, and really helps us together come up with a way to say it in kind of an everyday sort of way as opposed to some crazy theological thing that hardly anybody understands. So anyway, this is why you're going to want to be in a group for that series. It's going to be really good for that. So make sure you're signing up because, again, it's going to be a great opportunity. Aside from that, man, I want to pray right now, get us underway because got some great stuff in Proverbs, stuff that is good for me to remember, and I hope it's a blessing for you as well. Let's go ahead and pray together. Jesus, thank you for your word. Thank you for the fact that your word gives direction. We know there's a lot of places when we read the Bible, we go, man, I don't fully know maybe what that means. I scratch my head and try to get it. I'm grateful, though, for something like the book of Proverbs, where it's straight up, it's clear, it's to the point, and it gives us direction for life. And so I pray this morning that we receive that with joy and with anticipation, with a sense of conviction and confidence that says, man, I know in doing this, man, I have the potential to do well in you because you desire my life to be found in your life. And so thank you so much for this group of people, for this opportunity today to crack your book open and to see your heart. We love you. Thank you so much in your good and perfect name. Amen. So we live in the United States of America, and because of that, we live in a cultural cornucopia of opportunity and options, right? We live in a society that's very big on all the flavors, all the colors, all the diversity, all the options, all the independence, all the novelty, right? There is micro-tribalism for everything. You can find your own little special people group. You can get into your own little niche music or art or media or whatever else. There's all this variety in our day. What's interesting to me about that, when I kind of then juxtapose it with the book of Proverbs, is that frankly, Proverbs is not that progressive. It does not look at life and say, yes, there is all of this wild, sprawling opportunity and option for life. It kind of looks at life a little bit in a binary sort of way. It takes that spectrum of color and says, but really, at the core of life, it's all black and white. It's either A or B. It's one or two. It's that simple in that book. And what it all distills down to is that the very fabric of the life of the individual, there's only two potential roads in life. There is the road of the wise and the road of the fool. All right? Mr. T, the fool. You pity the fool in the book of Proverbs. Right? You dig the wise, you get worried about the fool. Or maybe more to the point, you should desire to be wise, and you should want to run from what it means to be the fool, right? And so I want to help us try to understand this binary thing today. And part of what I want us to understand is as we eventually define wise and fool, I want us to start to realize that being the fool, you can be a fool and yet look like you're put together. You can be a fool and have a pretty strong moral framework. There's a lot more to it because it doesn't matter your political affiliation, it doesn't matter your hobbies, your job, your personality type, all of that. At the end of the day, really, there's going to be some defining things between the wise and the fool that we need to take ownership of because everything in life is going to pour into one of those two buckets. And if we want to live well, we want to then highlight what the difference is between the two buckets. Now, again, to recap what this book is all about, right? This is why I love Proverbs. It's just a father sitting down with his kid saying, here's what you want to do to live well. And he's telling his child, I want you to grow in your wisdom quotient. And he's not telling him this simply because it's ethical or it's moral or it's religious, though there are elements to all of those things that are inside wisdom. But more importantly, he's trying to tell his kid, man, if you do what I'm telling you to do, you have an opportunity at a high quality of life. This is continually his motive. He's like, you're going to make your mom sleep well at night. You're going to make your dad really proud, and your life is going to go better if you do these things. It's that grounded, it's that simple, it's that basic. I want you to have life. In fact, starting off this morning in Proverbs 3:35, and by the way, there are notes on our app. If you'd like to follow along in those notes, they're all there, right? So you can take your own notes and follow along in the passages that are there because we're starting in chapter 3. And this dad says to his son a very simple thing. He says, the wise, they will inherit honor, but fools, they get disgrace. Right? So here you see something that's kind of interesting. These are not theological words, honor and disgrace. I mean, they're actually very practical, right? And so he's saying, hey man, if you want that kind of life where you feel a sense of honor, other people see you as honorable, then you want to pay attention to what is wise. If you want to be that person that is disgraced, people see as disgraceful, then you want to blaze down the path of the fool, right? Because that's what you'll experience. You'll experience disgrace. It'll go hard and not well with you. And so what we're talking about here is the difference between street-wise living and street-fool living. And if you live street-wise, your odds are better. You live like a street-fool, your odds are worse. Now, to really get the collard greens and beans context here, right? Which, by the way, are awesome at Valley House if you have not had them. There's a little pitch. To really get to this, I want us to understand what wise is and what fool is. Because it's very easy for us to impose ideas on those words from our 21st century context, right? So we'll look at the word wise, and we have this tendency to go, well, wisdom and wise is esoteric. It's Confucian. It's Yoda-isms with all wacky context and syntax, right? Or it's some reefer-smoking poet sitting on a bench someplace giving bumper sticker wisdom about consciousness. Like, that's wisdom. Well, that's not, in fact, wisdom, according to Solomon. For him, wisdom is very blue-collar. It's very redneck. It's very basic, simple. It's like fifth grade level stuff. I mean, that's how basic he makes it. And it's not, in essence, about this sense of enlightenment. It's so practical, in fact, it's almost borderline, son, if you clean your room every day at the end of the week, you'll have more time in life. Versus you try to do it all on Saturday, you know by then it's a mess and it's going to take you way longer. It's like that basic. And so for him, it's not so much about simply what you know. And this is what I want you, if you're taking notes, to write down. Wisdom is not simply about what you know, it's doing what you know. So, if you have all the theology in the world, all the right doctrine, all the proper information, but you don't do it, Solomon would say, then you're not wise. Because you know who has the greatest, most accurate theology in the universe? The devil. He gets it more clearly. He studied it more thoroughly. He understands it more brilliantly than anybody, but his conduct doesn't flow from what he knows. So he is not wise. He is the ultimate fool. So in the same way, Proverbs is saying, if you truly want to be wise, then it's streetwise obedience. It's not just simply streetwise wisdom. The wise, they do what God says. The fool, they do what they want. There's your difference. The wise does what God says. The fool does what they want. In fact, here's the description of the fool in Proverbs chapter 1. This is sort of them reflecting on wisdom and a rejection of it. He's saying, all right, my son, I want you to understand this is what happens with the fool. Because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord, they would have none of my counsel and despised all of my reproof. Therefore, he says, this is what happens in that context. They shall eat the fruit of their way. So there's the God way and then there's their way. They'll eat the fruit of their way. And they will have their fill of their own devices. For the simple are killed by their turning away and the complacency of fools that ultimately destroys them. See, because they're pulling from their own framework, their own reactions to desires in life. And he says that's always going to have a byproduct that they live from. And in the end, they continue to live from that. And it sort of wipes them out. In fact, I look at this little section. And if you were to give kind of a tagline to it, it's where you look at the fool and the line would be, good luck with that. Good luck with that. And I don't mean that in like some bitey, I told you so way. It's like, good luck with that. Reminds me when I was growing up in Arizona, last week I talked about swimming holes. We used to go to this one place called Grasshopper Point. It's this really, really deep swimming hole with all these cliffs that you could jump off of into the water. And they ended up going pretty high, right? But the trick was the cliffs kept going more like internal to the landscape. So the higher up you went, the further out you had to run and jump to clear everything below, right? And I remember this one guy's like, dude, I'm going to go to the top. I'm going to jump off the top. And the dude was totally wasted. And he's like, I'm going to go do it. I'm going to go do it. And you can't help but just go like, good luck with that, right? Dude climbs all the way up to the top. Woo! Goes running. Last he trips. Literally hit every plateau all the way down. And then plopped into the water. And they pulled him out, and he was pretty beat up and everything else. And his first thing was, somebody give me a cigarette. Somebody give me a cigarette. Good luck with that, right? Like it was the epitome of the fool. I'm going to do it my way, without my clarity, without my sense of well-being. I'm going to do my thing. And man, in the end, it showed him to be a fool. See, foolishness is that thing of good luck with that, because foolishness at its core is the absence of God's agenda. It's the absence of God's agenda. And I want to highlight again, the absence of God's agenda does not always play out in a life that may be more absent of ethics or morals. You can be highly moral, have amazing ethics, and still fall into this category in Proverbs of fool. Because, again, it goes back to God's agenda not being your agenda. Proverbs says, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. Now I know people that say there is no God, and they're very ethical. They have impeccable morals. But Proverbs would say, but still, they have an absence of God's agenda in their life, and that's what puts them in that category of whatever you do in life, good luck with that. Because there's something embedded into this piece of literature that's saying, the life of the wise is so deeply connected to the life giver who drives that wisdom, who is God. That's what you want at the core of your being, to be truly wise. So the fool is the absence of God in life, doing their own thing instead of his thing, because their thing's more critical to them than his thing. But the wise, they look altogether different. Chapter 8. Chapter 8 of Proverbs is wisdom kind of turned into a person, or we say personified. Some people even wonder if Proverbs 8 is a description, really, of the character of Jesus in the Old Testament. And so this is what it says. It says, now, O son, listen to me. Blessed are those who keep my ways. This is wisdom speaking about how people can be wise. Blessed are those who keep my ways. Hear instruction and be wise, and do not neglect it. Blessed is the one who listens to me, watching daily at the gates, waiting beside my doors. For whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. Right? So a couple of things here I want to highlight. First of all, whoever finds wisdom finds life. Right? So that's good because, again, this is the motivation. You want the most quality level of life that you can potentially experience in this life, then you want to find wisdom because there you find life. Also, in finding wisdom, you obtain God. And we talked about this last week, that God is the essence and rhythm of life, right? God makes life more full. But then wisdom is also sort of a formula in this particular section. It's something where you listen and you keep. You hear, and then from that you do. This is why I want to always emphasize it's not enough to simply know what ought to be, but we have to bring to the table doing what we ought to do. Nobody can claim to be wise if they don't follow up with what obedience is all about, because the fool is about the absence of God's agenda, but the wise is about adherence to God's agenda. Adherence. Which means this word obey is critical. It's critical, right? Proverbs 10:8 says this: the wise of heart will receive commandments, but a babbling fool will come to ruin. Again, here you see the difference. The wise says, all right, what does God say to do? And I'm going to do what God tells me to do. Not because I always like to do what God tells me to do. Not because I'm always inclined to do what God tells me to do. And certainly not because in the doing it's so simple to do. No, the wise says it doesn't matter all of the reasons why I can negate my responsibility to obedience, but I want the highest quality of life possible. And God says this is the way it's done through obeying Him. Therefore, I will obey. And in the end, I know that I will have that quality of life that He is offering to me. I'm going to do that. That is the wise person. The fool says, man, I'm just going to sit back, do my own thing. Who cares? See, this comes down to another two critical words, right? We have wise and fool, but embedded into these is really the difference between obey and sin, right? That's going to be the framework here. Now, here's what's tricky about these two words, I think, especially in our current society. Both words get a bum rap. Both of them do, right? We look at a word like sin, for example, and some people will say that's an abusive word. That's a shaming word. Sometimes people will go so far as to say, when you start to reference that word, that's a type of hate speech. You're making people feel bad about themselves by leveraging that word. So people look at the word sin and it's a turnoff. Like we go like, that's a terrible word. It's an ugly word. We need to divorce ourselves from that word. Some churches will say, we don't even want to say that word because, again, we don't want to turn people off to what the message is we're proclaiming, and so that word drops out of the vocabulary of the preacher on a Sunday morning because, again, it's a nasty, pesky, maybe sometimes offensive word to people. And so we extract. Equally, I find the word obey or commands or rules or laws. That also can be viewed in sort of a negative way, where people look at those words and they go, well, that's just legalism. That's being Puritan. That's being controlling. That's leveraging religion. Things like commands and rules, that doesn't stimulate life thriving. That's more about life draining. And so both obey and sin become sort of these ugly words today. And I would like to say I totally disagree. I totally disagree. In fact, I believe, and this is my own personal belief and conviction, but I believe that the very narrative today that's trying to take those two words and demonize those words, that very narrative is the very thing that's creating the climate in which people aren't enjoying life to the degree that they could. It's removing those words that robs us of life. It's not the presence of those words. Now, I would agree that sometimes those words are said with this bitey, arrogant, hypocritical velocity, which then the problem isn't the words, it's the deliverer. The mailman is what bites there, not the mail. Right? So these words, if taken properly, are beautiful and strengthening and wonderful, but we've taken them and said they're bad words. They're harsh words. They're mean words. And so while in one sense the narrative in our society plays out that we want to steer clear of these words, at the very same time within our society we see this growing concert and chorus of anxiety, of fear, of depression, discouragement, debt, emptiness, people feeling like life isn't complete. I need a counselor for this and a medication for that. And I'm not saying there isn't time and place for all of that sense of feeling, but it is strange when we live in this super wealthy, super healthy, super prosperous society that we're so miserable so often. It's like, why? And I can't help but say, because in some ways, the very things that foster life, we've removed from the equation, and now what we're tasting is death, even when we should be experiencing the fullness of earthly life from earthly things, but they don't do it for us. And like I said, it's my conviction that it's because we have basically constricted the branch right at the vine. Right? We said, no, these are the words that hurt us, and so we're going to put the clamp on. We don't operate in that framework of obey and sin anymore. And then, man, the whole rest of the branch is just withering, and the fruit is weak. Like, that's the challenge for us in life. Let's think about these two words. Sin. Sin is simply this idea of crossing a line or missing a mark. And it's that thing in the Bible that says, man, don't do this. But the reason God prescribes, don't do this, is because he's like, because if you do, I'm telling you, life doesn't flourish. It doesn't flourish. It drains. And so he puts up all these warning signs all over the place. Don't. I'm telling you, don't, because it robs you of life and only produces death, right? It only produces decay. So here's what's crazy. And we go, no, but those are offensive words. I don't want to see that. See, I look at everything about sin in the Bible a little bit like road signs, right? So you're driving down the road and it says curves ahead, slow down. Or children at play. Or steep grade, 7%. Be prepared to use your brakes. We don't drive down the road at those signs and go, that's hate speech. Isn't that pushy? Road religion. Like we don't do that, right? We don't look and go, they're just trying to push their curvy road agenda on me. It makes me feel shamed. I'm going to blaze through those curves. I don't care. Makes me feel better inside, right? I'm doing my own thing. The reason the signs are there is saying only the fool doesn't pay attention, right? Wise people go, oh, curves, 40 miles an hour. That's a brilliant idea. Kids ahead. I should slow down. If it was my kids, that's what I would want too, right? Same thing. That's why it's all there. All those warnings of sin are not some harsh, capricious jerkwad of a God sitting on a throne someplace saying, how do I wreck their Friday night? That is not it. He looks and he says, man, these people keep going to things that don't satisfy, they don't bring contentment, they don't bring peace. And so I'm going to say, don't do these things and you'll do well. That's the road of wisdom, and life will flourish there. And then we have to look at the road signs and make decisions. But he says, I want you to decide wisely because there is life. You see, it's not just enough to say, well, then I'm not going to sin. I'm going to make sure that I obey the not-to-dos. That leaves a vacuum. So then there's also the to-dos. That's obedience, the things that we should actually pursue. So the Bible talks about things like commands, laws, rules, and regulations. And again, all of those are there, not simply to distract you from doing what you really want to do, but rather God's like, listen, I'm telling you, I built you. I built you, and I gave you a set of directions to know how you work as a piece of equipment, so to speak, right? And I'm telling you, if you operate within your specs, you're going to flourish. You decide you don't want to operate within your specs, right? And you want to use your life outside of design, you might be able to do it, but you're not going to flourish in the operation. And so all that stuff, rules, laws, commands, all of that, are for our good and for our flourishing. I mean, think about how they apply in other parts of life, right? Imagine if in physics, we said, you know what? We're done with laws in physics. No more laws. Laws are oppressive. Laws are telling us how we have to see physics. I want to see physics different. So I'm disbanding the laws of physics. You're cute, all right? It's like, Doesn't work that way. The laws are just the laws. They always play no matter what, whether you accept them or reject them, the laws are the laws. Imagine if in computer programming, we have programmers here, and they said, you know what, I'm done with commands and programming. No more commands. I'm just going to start gibberish. Woo-hoo-hoo! See what happens. No, there's commands in programming for a reason. Imagine if we said tomorrow in business and in government, no more regulations. We're just getting rid of that. I'm sure the banks will be completely honest, as will all the politicians, because they're the bastions of honesty in our society. They don't need any checks. They don't need regulation to operate. We're going to get rid of all of it. Or imagine if we got rid of the rules in things like sports. Well, the Seahawks do that a lot anyway. They just get a lot of flags for it. Or math. 2 plus 2 is kosher. It's like, it's not even a thing, right? And so in the same way that laws and commands and regulations and rules cause us to flourish in life and all the other things of life, how much so more in the God stuff? See, the not-to-dos and the to-dos, embracing that sin is sin and obey is obey because it brings freedom. To do that, you will feel a liberty in life. A liberty in life. In fact, in 1 Samuel 15, there's a passage that kind of sparked Solomon's interest, and he kind of twists it into a different way of looking at it in Proverbs 21:3. He says, to do righteousness and justice is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. So he's borrowing from this ancient prophet and saying, there is something about this that's really, really critical to life. Now, if I jump back to 1 Samuel 15, it says this. Samuel says, has the Lord as great a delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices in obeying the voice of the Lord? He says, behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen, it's better than the fat of rams. Now, we read this and kind of go, well, what does that mean practically, right? Why is it better to obey than to have to give some sacrifice for sin? Why is it better to listen than to have to give up this animal's life for your heirs? Right? Now, there's a lot of ways we can look at this as far as kind of the ceremonial side and everything else, but I'm going to try to make this super practical. Here's why obey is better than having to give a sacrifice for sin. When you obey, you ready? There's no regret. When you obey, there's no shame. When you obey, there is no consequence that you have to then try to put things back together. When you obey, you don't have to ask for forgiveness in a sense of failure. When you obey, you don't risk hurting the people around you that you love. When you obey, you don't have to risk your own interior of defeat and embarrassment and that sense of just like, I can't believe I did that. This is why to obey is better than saying, God, forgive me. Thank you, Jesus, that you're the sacrifice. Now, are we perfect? No. I'm trying to practicalize this. When we're in those positions of I can go left and I can go right, I got this moment of decision in my life. I can obey or I can sin. I want us to all go, oh, right, but Proverbs and Samuel says to obey is better than sacrifice. Because nobody regrets doing the next right thing, but many have regretted doing the next wrong thing. And you may not regret it right then. It may take a week, a month, a year, a decade, whatever, but eventually there's going to be this sense of, why did I do that? And life doesn't flourish there. It doesn't flourish in that space. Now, you can be forgiven of that, but there's still that sense of baggage, and you can't put all the consequence back into the tube, so to speak. Like toothpaste is everywhere. It just is what it is, and you have to kind of cope with that. But to obey, it's better. It's better. I think about it throughout Proverbs. Proverbs repeatedly tells us that sin hurts all the time. In chapter 6, verse 11, it says, lazy hurts. When you don't do what you know you should do because you just don't feel like doing it, lazy hurts. In 7:23, we see that lust hurts every time. Sex taken outside of a context designed by God, lust will hurt. Hurt you, hurt your spouse, hurt the people around you, hurt others. You look at the Catholic Church right now, innocent people hurt because of lust gone awry. You look at evangelical pastors right now that are blowing out for affairs, lust gone awry. Pornography, lust gone awry. People looking at romance novels and romance movies and wishing they had a different guy than their guy, lust gone awry. Lust always hurts. Chapter 10, verse 12, hate hurts. You hate your life, your circumstance, your boss, your job, your spouse, your whatever. It hurts. You see in 11:6 that addiction hurts. Just a little bit of drinking to take the edge off, just some prescription meds to deal with the problems, whatever it is. Like, addiction hurts. Stubborn hurts in chapter 12, verse 1. Greed hurts in 11:24. Pride hurts in 16:18. Bitter hurts. You don't like how life handed something to you, and you're just frustrated at the people that hurt you. Bitter hurts in 14:21. Indifference hurts in 14:31. And the list goes on and on and on. Sin hurts. It robs us of life. It robs us of life. And that's what we want to own. Why obey? Why resist sin? Because it's the religious thing to do? And I'm saying, well, actually because it's the sensible thing to do. It just happens to be a religious thing. But it makes a lot more sense. In other words, it's wise. It's wise. Last week I talked about the difference between Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, right? Where Ecclesiastes is this real, honest assessment of Solomon's life. And Proverbs is then a reflection on a roadmap through the minefield of Ecclesiastes. So Ecclesiastes is like, here's how life is I lived it. This is my articulation of a journey that I have taken in life. And then from that, I can go back through, reverse engineer, and say, can I tell you that you want to weave through life in a certain way? And the best way to do that is Proverbs. It is the map to the oasis destination based on everything I've learned. And so in Ecclesiastes, what this dad says to his kid is, listen, I've lived a lot of life. I've done a lot of things, let me tell you. And he actually begins to tell all of his frat boy stories to his kid, right? I was sleeping around, I was partying like crazy, and I'd get wasted and wake up in my own vomit. I mean, like, there's craziness. And he's like, and so then I would over-rotate, and I'd be like, now I'm going to build stuff and be an architect and create parks and cityscapes, and I'm going to pour into people, and I'm going to be truly religious, and I'm going to show up to temple every day, and I'm going to do all those things. But there was a sense of times in which there was just a religiosity in there. He's like, so I tried all the extremes. Sometimes I've made really great decisions. Sometimes I made really stupid ones, and from that I've learned a lot of stuff in life. He says there's a lot of meaninglessness out there. There's a lot of things that can pull you off the rails. There's a lot of stuff that can distract you. There's a lot of stuff that's going to get in the way of maximizing life. So from all of that, he sums up the book of Ecclesiastes. And this is what he says. Chapter 12, verse 13, tail end of the book. Says, the end of all the matter has been heard. I've told you everything about my life, and here's what I have concluded. Fear God and keep his commandments. Right? Final words of a father to a son, having lived this whole life. He says, son, let me tell you, let me boil it down to one very simple thing. You want to do well in life, fear God and obey his commands. Not because God is harsh, not because God is impatient, not because God is vindictive, not because God is demanding, but because God is loving and gracious and designed you with a designed intent. And when you do those things, you live life well. Let's pray together. Jesus, I think about why you saved us in your grace. Right? I mean, we are imperfect. We are riddled with failure. And if obedience was the key to us knowing you, we would fail that test every time. We would not pass the test, right? We know that we're really, truly, in a lot of ways, just broken. Even in our best, and we become proud, and that's broken. And so it's only by your grace, your putting yourself in our place and taking our baggage and sin on yourself so that you might give us your life and your righteousness. It's by that equation alone that we know you, by that equation alone that we one day spend eternity with you in your vast kingdom that is more real than this world. Like all of that we know to be true. And at the same time, we know that you also saved us so we could live in the abundance of life that you designed us to live in. In essence, to get back to the stuff of the earliest part of the Bible where man and woman walked with you in harmony and peace. And the core of that was their obedience to you, not because they had to. It was demanded of them to do it, but because that's where life is found. And that's what I pray for us as your followers, that we will see acknowledging sin and pursuing obedience as more than just like this rule thing, but rather a life thing. And Jesus, I pray for those who are with us this morning that may not be your followers, don't call themselves Christians, they're kind of just checking out this church gig or whatever else, that they will begin to understand that that's the real message. Because I think too often we preach a message in our world that's so about whether ethics are right or wrong, and there's this moral this and immoral that we miss that the reason these things are given is for life and life flourishing in you. And so I pray that it is delight, not duty, that it is joy, not simply compulsory response that drives us, and that from that we experience abundance in you. Jesus, we thank you for what you offer. I pray that we are on your track, embracing what you say, because at the core, again, you give us life. We thank you and praise you in your perfect name.